Did I scare you? Were you afraid? That sensation is called fear. Now, that was fear response to a frightful sight. But what about other types of fear? The fear you have to a frightful sight, like my mask, was fleeting. It dissipated instantly. You've probably already forgotten about it. But what about fear related to diseases or fear related to the consequences of your actions or inactions? How quickly does that type of fear dissipate? Or does it? Our topic today is fear. I think this is a very important topic. It affects everything you learn about menopause and everything you don't learn about menopause. It affects how you use the information you have. It even affects how much you believe facts. And it definitely affects your decisions about how to manage your menopause. Although you probably don't think of fear as a topic in the arena of menopause, this could be one of the most important videos. So even if you think you have no fear or you don't need to listen to me talk about fear, stay tuned. If you're like most women, you'll find that the very first step in successfully managing your menopause in any way at all is to understand the effect that fear can have on your menopause management. The kind of fear that affects your menopause is the kind that causes paralysis. Now, I don't mean the kind of paralysis that affects your ability to act. I'm referring to the kind of paralysis that affects your willingness to act. You see, fear is a prison. It imprisons you into a way of thinking that inhibits your ability to consider all your options. So I'm going to present some of the imprisoning fears that affect your menopause management. But before I talk about fear specifically, I want to speak in more general terms about emotions. It's a basic principle of the human brain that we are all pre-programmed to react in roughly the same way to any stimulus that creates an emotional response. And if multiple humans receive that same stimulus, the collective emotional response becomes very strong. So if a speaker is addressing an audience, the very best way for the speaker to get the audience to agree with him is to evoke an emotional response. Why? Because humans are emotional creatures. And as much as we like to think that we are of higher intelligence and capable of ignoring our emotions when they are illogical, and we hardly are ever able to do so. So regardless of whether the speaker is talking to just one other individual or to a crowd of thousands, the very best way to get others to share his point of view is to elicit emotion. And even if the emotional response is completely at odds with the facts or the statistics, you'll probably listen to your emotions more than you listen to the facts. Now, this is because communicating facts takes time, and it also takes concentration. You have to pay attention. And you know, people are not very good at paying attention. On the contrary, sharing feelings happens instantly. The way one person feels often affects the way others feel. And feelings affect us quickly, automatically, and unconsciously. People convey emotions to one another before they even have the opportunity to think about a situation. So now let's narrow down emotions just a bit. Let's separate them into pleasure and pain. It just so happens that these two emotions, pleasure and pain, are dictated by the law of approach and avoidance. Have you ever heard of the law of approach and avoidance? It's really very simple. It states that we approach things that bring us pleasure and we avoid things that bring us pain. In other words, we move toward pleasure and away from pain. This is a bias that is hardwired in the human brain, but there's more to it than just approach and avoidance. If you associate something with pleasure, not only do you approach it, you'll also act on it. For example, let's say that you're starving to death. If I stand at the top of a hill and shout, "I have food for you," you'll want the food. The food represents something that will bring you pleasure, so you want to approach it. But in order to approach it, you have to climb the hill. Well, because the food represents a reward, not only do you want it, you're willing to climb a hill to get it. So in addition to making you want the food, I can get you to actually do something in order to get the food. In other words, I can induce you to act on the positive emotion of pleasure. So any emotion that is positive gets people to go out of their way to obtain whatever is associated with the positive emotion. Okay, now let's change that situation a bit. Let's say that just like the first example, you're starving to death. And I, just like the first example, stand at the top of a hill and shout, "I have food for you." But this time, let's say that you've heard that walking up a hill will cause cancer. You have no proof that walking up a hill will cause cancer, but hearing that it will scared you. And now you avoid walking up hills. So instead of simply feeling pleasure at the presence of the food, you also feel pain at the possibility of getting cancer. So what do you think happens? Do you think it's human nature to climb the hill because you're starving? And if you don't climb the hill, you'll starve to death regardless of the possibility of getting cancer? You see, the logical reaction would be one in which you use your brain to think about the alternatives. If you don't climb the hill, you are going to be dead very soon due to starvation. And if you do climb the hill, you may or may not get cancer, but you won't die right away. Well, here's the kicker. The human brain is built to associate action with pleasure, not pain. In other words, walking up the hill is great when it's associated with a reward. But your brain is equally designed to freeze when it senses pain. So in this example, in which you fear cancer from walking up the hill, as much as you want to believe that you do the logical thing and walk uphill to save yourself from starvation, psychology shows that you would freeze. In other words, fear inhibits action. So this law of approach and avoidance is about your tendency to act only when something will bring you pleasure and to freeze or fail to act when something might bring you pain. And the facts don't matter if you're afraid. The fear takes over. It prevents you from even considering the logic. Now, the way this plays out in terms of marketing is that anyone who wants you to do something will entice you with something that you equate with pleasure. And anyone who wants you to avoid doing something will scare you with something you equate with pain. So now we're ready to apply these principles to menopause. You see, you are the victim of all sorts of information, most of it from people who want to benefit from your actions or inactions. And by understanding how they appeal to your sense of emotion, you'll know why they use the tactics they use in order to get you to do what they want you to do. So let's start with menopause itself. Has your life experience caused you to regard menopause as something associated with pleasure or with pain? See what I mean? I'm going to guess that until you found my menopause education, you probably thought of menopause as undesirable, painful, or miserable. And all those emotions are negative. Collectively, they probably made you fear menopause. And what did I just tell you about fear? Fear induces you to avoid action. So, did you eagerly get the education you needed despite the fear? Or did you delude yourself into thinking it would never happen to you and stick your head in the sand? Remember the video I presented on denial of menopause? It was video number 62. The reason women are in denial of menopause is because they're afraid of it. That fear causes them to freeze, and they do nothing. My goal is to educate all women so that they realize that menopause can be the best part of their lives. You can control everything by choosing options that suit you. I'm hoping that associating menopause with pleasure will get them to act and get this education. Okay, what about estrogen? When you hear people talk about estrogen, do they imply that estrogen is good or bad? Do they make you believe estrogen is your friend or your enemy? Do they say that estrogen is what makes you feminine, soft, well-lubricated, vibrant, witty, strong-boned, youthful, and free of heart attacks? Or do they tell you that estrogen is dominant and that it causes all sorts of diseases? Do they tell you that estrogen prevents heart attacks, osteoporosis, and Alzheimer's? Or do they tell you that estrogen causes breast cancer? I'm going to bet that you hear more of the fear-based things about estrogen. And even though logically you know that you felt and functioned much better with estrogen than without it, you probably reacted more in accordance with the fears. You probably didn't stop to think, hey, wait a minute, my body has loved estrogen all these years. When did it go from being my favorite friend to my greatest enemy? And you didn't think about that because you froze. The fear paralyzed you. So you did nothing. But then the progesterone pushers realized that you feared estrogen. And what did they do? They seized upon your fear and decided to benefit financially from it. They told you that estrogen dominance was the reason for all your menopause problems and that progesterone was the cure. Even though progesterone has always made you feel yucky with pregnancy, with PMS, you believed them. Why? Because your fear of estrogen prevented you from considering the illogic in what they were telling you. You were already in a state of inaction with regard to using estrogen. So all they had to do was seize upon that to put you in a state of action with regard to progesterone. They marketed progesterone as a safe product, and you paid money to get it. Do you see how this constitutes fear marketing? Do you see why women are so confused? What about the fear of weight gain? You've always known that weight gain is directly associated with diet and exercise, and before menopause, it was relatively easy to maintain your weight. And that was because your sex hormones helped keep your metabolism rapid. But at menopause, you gain weight like crazy. Why? Because you lose the sex hormones that helped you keep your metabolism rapid. But what do you hear about weight gain and hormones like birth control and HRT? Do other women tell you that hormones help them lose weight? Or do they tell you that hormones made them gain weight? I'm gonna bet you've heard all sorts of stories from your girlfriends about hormones making them get as big as a house. So what did you do? Did you say hogwash that makes no sense? Or did you adopt a fear of weight gain that paralyzed you into avoiding hormones? Despite the fact that it isn't until you lose your hormones at menopause that women gain weight, very few women think logically about this. Instead, they react emotionally to their fear of weight gain. And although they gain weight at menopause anyway, they assume that hormones would make them gain even more weight, when in fact the opposite is true. But that's the effect of fear. It imprisons you. It inhibits your tendency to apply any logic at all, no matter what the situation. Okay, now for breast cancer. How much have you heard women talk about fearing breast cancer? And how much have you heard them talk about fearing a heart attack? You've heard me say numerous times that your greatest risk at menopause is heart attack. How many times did you have to hear me say that before you realized it was true? Had you been so scared into fearing breast cancer that you didn't even believe me at first? Did you have to acknowledge that I give you nothing but facts before accepting those statistics that I delivered? And even if you have accepted the statistics, are you still letting your fear of breast cancer govern your decisions? You see, statistics are real. They tell you numerically what's most important. So you would expect that upon hearing 1 out of 2 women die of heart attack and 1 out of 29 die of breast cancer, that women would immediately shift their focus to the disease that's most likely to kill them. But you would be surprised. The fear of breast cancer is a very difficult thing to erase or reverse. Once you've gotten an injection of fear, it blinds you, clouds your thinking, makes you deaf, and paralyzes you. So fear is like quicksand. It's just so difficult to let go of it. In fact, most women actually defend their fears. They justify the fear, rationalize it, and even protect it. The fear sort of takes on a life of its own. I think this fear of breast cancer is the greatest fear of all, and that's a real shame because we have multiple ways to prevent breast cancer, but women haven't gotten that information. Or if they have, they're too stuck on the fear to act on it. We have wonderful means of finding breast cancer early when it's entirely curable. They include your self-breast exam and mammograms. But women are so scared that they have demonized these to indicate that either they aren't capable of doing their own self-breast exam or that mammograms cause the cancer in the first place. That's just crazy, absolutely crazy. But it's entirely consistent with the effect that fear has on behavior. So whether you have a fear of menopause or estrogen or weight gain or breast cancer, please, please get this education. At some point, you'll recognize fear as fear and facts as facts. And that's when you'll be free from prison. And anytime you encounter marketing that preys on your fears, you'll recognize it for what it is. I just don't want your future to be fear-based. I want it to be logic-based. Think about this a bit. If you want to meet with me to discuss your fears, I'll be happy to do that with you. I'm not judgmental. I'm here to help you. Just go to menopausetailor.me and schedule a one-on-one consultation, and I will help you with anything. In the meantime, subscribe to my channel and follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I will see you in a week. Bye.